The laughter drifted like static across the polished halls of Terran. Is -4. It began with a hiss from a serpentine Warship trader, coiled behind a crate of pheromone stones. Then came the harmonic trill of a pair of Xarn twins, their crystalline, bodies vibrating in amusement as they pointed toward the long-legged creature trotting loyally beside the human female. Even the usually stoic Galactic envoy blinked all 6 eyes in synchronized mockery, mandibles clicking with sarcastic rhythm. Tail beast, one chortled. Does she expect it to guard her or lick her wounds? She feeds it from her own rations, another observed. Primitive. Hilarious. Ava Tran heard every word. She always did. The universal translator, built into the collar at her neck, rendered alien dialects into soft English in her ear, each word as clear as if spoken by her own kind. And yet her expression remained calm serene, even as she strode past the crowded promenade. Her pace was even, her posture relaxed. She didn't flinch. Juno walked at her side, paws silent against the alloy floor, ears flicking back at the rising laughter. She didn't bark, didn't snarl, just stayed close to Ava's leg, her body pressed with the kind of quiet tension that only another dog lover would understand. Protective. Waiting. It wasn't the first time this had happened since humanity's entrance into the galactic community. Ava had watched 1,000 alien faces twist in confusion or contempt whenever a human brought along a creature they considered lesser. Dogs, cats, parrots. One crew from Mars even brought a chinchilla. And in every starport, council chamber, or diplomatic gala, the reaction had been the same bemusement fading to mockery. Pets were seen as emotional burdens, unnecessary, inefficient. But Juno was no burden. She was Ava's shadow, her confidant in silence, her companion across light years. And in ways the aliens would never understand, she was more than useful. She was grounding. When you worked on unknown worlds, sampling spores that might rewrite your DNA, or monitoring insectoids with neural hives, the familiar weight of a moment, living soul beside you kept the madness out of your head. Ava paused at a transit gate. 2 Arkan engineers leaned against a nearby console, watching her. One of them, a lime-colored male with biowires pulsing along his arms, tilted his head and grinned with too many teeth. "Why bring the animal, human?" he asked with a chuckle. "Did your species not evolve past companions with fur?" She turned to him slowly, brushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. Her eyes were warm brown, but the kind of warm that hinted at depth, not softness. Juno sat beside her without command, tail sweeping once across the floor. "She's not just a companion," Ava said evenly. "She's family." The laughter stopped, not entirely, but enough to leave a pause. The kind of pause that makes a room breathe differently. Ava didn't wait for a reply. She walked on, Juno by her side, and behind her, silence trailed like a shadow of its own. The aliens didn't understand. Not yet, but they would. The moon above Terran's 4 hung like a pale eye, ever watching the station below. Inside its reinforced halls of steel and crystal, deals were struck in whispered languages, and secrets passed from clawed hands to gloved fingers with practiced ease. Terran's was neutral ground, at least in name. In reality, it was a fragile truce, built on commerce and convenience, not trust. Ava Tran moved through the station with quiet purpose, her datapad tucked under one arm, and Juno shadowing her every step. The promenade was busier than usual. Alien traders argued in sing-song tones over the price of mineral-rich soil from dead planets. A pair of insectoid diplomats clicked out negotiations in bursts of wing beats and pheromones. Holographic ads flickered in a dozen languages, promising new augmentations, spice fruit wine, or half-price mercenaries. No one looked twice at Juno now. Not today. The laughter from before had faded, replaced by a low hum of curiosity. Most dismissed the dog as a cultural oddity, like bringing a fossil to a fusion lab. But there were others quiet, watchful eyes that tracked Ava's movements a little too carefully. The first whisper came from a young Varnari pilot she'd met weeks ago. He approached her near the hydroponics dome, eyes darting nervously between her and Juno. "Watch your path, human," he murmured. "Some walk behind you now." Ava frowned. "What do you mean?" But he had already turned, disappearing into the crowd-like vapor dot. Later that day, a message appeared on her secured terminal, unsigned and coded in ancient Earth ASCII. One sentence, blinking on screen. "Not all deals made on Terranese are legal." She leaned back in her chair, the faint hum of the station's generators buzzing in the floor beneath her feet. Juno, curled beneath her desk, lifted her head and growled low. Ava reached down to scratch behind her ears. "I feel it too," she whispered. Terranese had always been a place of delicate balance between peace and corruption, trade and extortion. But now there was something new, something colder. A tension crawling in the walls like static. Her fellow researchers had gone. Quiet. Even the station's cheerful maintenance bots seemed to roll slower through the corridors. Their chirps muted dot, and then came the rumors dot miners were vanishing from the lower sectors. Those who refused to sell their claim rights near the subterranean vents. Some said they transferred out without notice. Others said they simply disappeared. No logs, no footage. Just empty bunks and silence. Security offered no answers. The station director claimed it was administrative reshuffling. Ava didn't believe it. Neither did Juno. The dog had grown restless. She no longer slept through the artificial night cycles. Her ears twitched constantly, her gaze tracking invisible patterns through the vents above their room. Twice, Ava caught her standing by the door with fur raised along her spine, a low snarl rumbling in her throat. Something was wrong. And then, during a routine check in Sector 7, Ava spotted a new face towering, armored, cold-eyed, DRAK single quotes ZIL. Name sent whispers through the engineering bay. A Xarnian enforcer, known for making people vanish. His record, spotless. His methods, brutal. He walked with the slow confidence of a predator, and when his yellow eyes met Ava's, there was no emotion. Just calculation. Juno stood between them, silent and still. Her lip curled, just barely exposing one tooth. Draxel smiled. "She's protective," he said in a deep, syrupy tone. "I admire that." Ava didn't speak. Her fingers tightened on Juno's collar as the enforcer turned to walk away. His last words drifted back to her like smoke. "Be careful, human. Sometimes loyalty is ... a leash." She watched him vanish into the crowd. And for the first time since she arrived, Ava Tran felt afraid. Not for herself, for Juno. The artificial dawn lights hummed into life, bathing the corridors of Terranese 4 in a sterile glow. But even under that soft illumination, Ava Tran couldn't shake the feeling of shadows, creeping closer. She hadn't slept much. Juno had refused to rest the entire night. The German shepherd had paced the perimeter of their small quarters, tail low, hackles raised. Every creak of the ventilation ducts made her lift her head, ears perked, nose twitching. There were no intrusions recorded by the station security. AI. But Ava had learned long ago to trust Juno over any sensor grid. They had barely finished breakfast when the door chimed. Mila stood in the corridor, her wide purple eyes blinking up at Ava, antennae twitching. The Heskare girl had grown fond of Juno over the past 2 weeks, ever since she'd stumbled upon the dog napping near the arboretum. Now she visited daily, always with the same request. "Can I walk with her today?" Ava hesitated. She glanced at Juno, who was already sitting patiently at Mila's side, tail sweeping once across the floor. The girl laughed with joy and hugged her. Only inside the promenade, Ava warned gently. And she stays within sight? Understood? Mila nodded solemnly. Always. As they walked through the corridors, Juno kept a slower pace, her eyes scanning the corners, ears turning like radar. Mila skipped alongside her, giggling as she showed Juno a shiny trinket she'd gotten from a trade stall. She understands me, Mila whispered, her small hand stroking Juno's back, better than most people do. Ava smiled, but the knot in her stomach didn't loosen. Something about the previous night Draxiel's stare, his mocking tone kept echoing in her mind. Loyalty is a leash. The phrase played over and over, like a cold wind through her thoughts. Later that day, during a council gathering in the central plaza, Ava found herself seated among a sea of species. The event was supposed to be ceremonial, a renewal of the neutral accord between the mineral guilds and the Terran's overseers. A show of unity. A farce. Ava wasn't even paying attention to the speech. She was watching Juno. The dog sat beside her chair, perfectly still. Not relaxed, but alert her gaze. Locked on a cluster of crates being offloaded near the supply terminals. A group of station workers in matching uniforms moved between them. But Juno wasn't watching the workers. She was watching the crates. Suddenly, she growled. It wasn't loud. Not yet, but it was enough to turn heads. Ava placed a hand on her fur. Easy, she whispered. What is it? Juno's eyes didn't leave the containers. Her muscles were tight, coiled. Then she stood, pulling slightly against her leash. More people were noticing now. A few alien delegates glanced their way. Frowning. Control your beast, someone muttered nearby. But Ava didn't move. Her breath caught as she followed Juno's line of sight and realized something strange. The workers were too clean. Their uniforms bore no wear, no dirt. One of them moved like a soldier, not a laborer. Another scanned the crowd with subtle eye motions, tactical, not logistical. Juno let out a sharp bark. The guards turned toward her. Ava stood. Something's wrong with those crates, she said. Check them. A council overseer looked irritated. Human, this is not the time. A sudden shriek of metal tore through the air as one of the crates split open. A power surge flashed. Blue, and a wave of heat poured across the plaza. Panic erupted as delegates scattered, knocking over chairs and knocking down banners. Smoke billowed from the ruptured container. Security swarmed in. Juno lunged forward, dragging Ava halfway across the platform until she stopped near a second crate. The bark that followed was pure warning. Security hesitated. A low-ranking officer, half dazed, approached Ava. How did she know? She smelled it, Ava said grimly. She always does. Later, once the smoke had cleared and the hidden explosives were safely disabled, the security report would credit a canine unit for saving hundreds of lives. But the official report wouldn't include what Ava saw in the aftermath. Near the shadows of the docking tunnels, Draxiel watched her again. This time, he wasn't smiling. His eyes shifted briefly to Juno, and then he vanished into the dark. Corridors of Terran's, 4 felt colder after the explosion. The council plaza was sealed off for investigation, but everyone knew what had almost happened. 2 crates filled with military-grade explosives, smuggled in under the guise of sensor calibrators. Detonation would have torn through the central chamber and vaporized half the diplomatic envoys gathered there. Juno was now whispered about in passing. No longer a joke, no longer the tail beast, but something else. A warning. Still, Ava received no recognition, no commendation, no apology. Instead, she was summoned to the station's oversight committee, a meeting held in a glass-paneled chamber high above the docking bays. The aliens who greeted her wore ceremonial garb, their faces neutral, but the air stank of caution. Of deflection, Ms. Tran, the lead overseer, a pale-boned Drelthi said, adjusting the translation metrics. On her collar. Your animal has caused a disturbance during an official ceremony. Ava blinked. She saved your lives. She barked at containers, the Drelthi countered coldly. You acted without proper authority. Had you been wrong? But I wasn't, Ava said. The silence that followed was thick. None of the overseers thanked her. None of them looked her in the eye. She left the chamber with her hands shaking not from fear, but fury. Later that evening, Juno was unusually agitated. She refused to eat, refused to lie down. She kept circling the walls, nose close to the seams of the metal panels. Ava tried to calm her, but something deep in her gut told her not to. She grabbed her toolkit and followed Juno. They moved through the research wing first, then down a narrow auxiliary stairwell rarely used by civilians. The lights were dim here. Dust clung to the edges of the floor panels. Pipes overhead hissed with recycled oxygen. Juno stopped at a maintenance hatch. She growled low. Ava crouched beside her and scanned the hatch panel. Locked, high-level encryption. Not accessible to standard personnel. She hesitated, but then the sound came. A click, soft, barely audible, like a camera shutter. Ava's breath caught. Juno lunged, snarling, her paws slamming against the panel. The lock flashed red, then green overridden. The hatch opened a crack. Someone was inside. Ava gripped her stun baton, reached forward, and yanked the hatch open. She expected a janitor, a worker, a rat. Instead, she found a room glowing with monitors. Screens displayed feeds from every part of the station. Some were marked with red sigil sections that weren't even supposed to have cameras. Private quarters, medical bays, council chambers, and one screen frozen. Pause showed her and Juno walking side by side in the plaza. Just moments before the incident. Surveillance, she whispered. Illegal surveillance. Footsteps echoed behind her. She spun just as a figure stepped into the narrow hallway. Tall, broad, armored. Drak single quotes. Zeal. Quotes well. Draxiel's smile faltered for only a heartbeat. But that single moment, one breath of hesitation, was all it took. Juno exploded forward, like a bullet loosed from a railgun. The Xarnian enforcer's reflexes were fast-trained, honed, but not fast enough. Not against the fury of a creature driven by love and the need to protect. Her teeth sank into the soft armor at his thigh, dragging him back before he could fully activate the plasma knife strapped to his belt. He shouted a guttural snarl of pain and rage as he staggered sideways, slamming against the metal wall. Ava didn't think. She just moved. Her hand found the wrench at her hip, a heavy maintenance tool she always kept when working in unstable atmospheric bays. She swung it with every ounce of strength she had. The wrench cracked against Draxiel's shoulder with a sharp clang, throwing him off balance. He roared and lashed out, backhanding her hard enough to send her crashing into a supply cabinet. Flared in her ribs, but she forced herself up. Teeth gritted. Juno was still fighting, still biting, clawing, snapping with relentless fury. She was fast, yes, but what made her terrifying was her refusal to back down. No matter the size of the enemy, no matter the pain, Draxiel was bleeding now. His thick purple blood ran in rivulets down his leg and across the floor. Going to regret this, he spat, drawing his plasma knife at last. Ava screamed, "Nitrogen monoxide!" She launched herself at him, not to attack, but to protect. She threw her body between him and Juno as the knife surged to life, its edge glowing blue with deadly heat. But even as the blade arced downward, Juno moved. She launched up, jaws clamping, around his arm, twisting his wrist with bone-snapping force. The knife clattered to the floor, bouncing twice before fizzling out. Draxil howled in pain, then slammed his elbow into Juno's side, flinging her across the hallway. The dog hit the wall with a sickening thud and crumpled to the ground. Ava's world stopped. She didn't hear the alarm suddenly triggered by the broken surveillance room. She didn't hear the distant stomps of incoming security forces. All she heard was her own heart pounding and the silence from Juno's still body. "Get up," she whispered. "Nothing. Juno." "Get up." Draxel was limping, bleeding, panting hard, but he turned toward her, looming again. "You should have walked away," he rasped. Ava's hands curled into fists, something ancient, something that had slept in her bones her whole. Life rose like a storm tide. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a warrior. But she was human, and someone had just hurt her family. With a scream pulled from the deepest corners of her soul, she charged. Her fists were wild. Her pain was fuel. Every blow she landed struck with the force of a breaking heart and an enraged mind. She hit his jaw, his neck, his ribs over and over, until his legs buckled and he dropped to one knee. She grabbed the plasma knife and held it to his throat. "Move," she hissed, "and I swear I'll finish what Juno started." He didn't move. Security arrived seconds later, armed, alert, confused, and froze at the scene. Draxil bleeding and unconscious. On the floor. Ava standing over him with blood on her shirt and fire in her eyes. And Juno, she stirred. Ava dropped the knife and ran to her. The dog whimpered. Her side was bruised, but she lifted her head and licked Ava's hand. Ava broke. The tears came. Then silent, trembling sobs as she held Juno's head in her lap, whispering over and over, "You're okay. You're okay." One of the guards stepped forward. What happened here? Ava didn't look at him. She just cradled her dog and said, with quiet steel in her voice, "She protected me." Another guard looked at the destroyed surveillance room, the illegal feeds, the unconscious Xarnian enforcer with a cracked EXOSUIT. Then he looked at the dog. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then someone muttered almost reverently, "That's no-tail beast." And Juno, even bruised and battered, lifted her head just enough to growl at the corridor beyond, still watching, still guarding, still ready. The med wing on Terran's 4 was quiet in the hours after the incident, unnaturally quiet, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Ava sat on the floor beside Juno's recovery pod, one hand resting gently on the dog's back as slow pulses of bioscanners moved across her fur. The impact against the wall had caused bruising along her ribs and left a hairline fracture in her hind leg. But she was alive, alive and healing. Ava hadn't left her side. She barely noticed the stream of visitors, officers, and curious station techs who came to the med wing under the pretense of routine reports or status updates. But they all had the same goal, to see the dog, the one they'd once laughed at, the one who had leapt into fire for her human. The official report was still being rewritten. Draxil had been taken into high-security detainment, his armor stripped, his rights revoked under Section 9G intergalactic treason via sabotage of neutral ground. The surveillance chamber had exposed more than hidden cameras. It contained proof of smuggling operations, bribed station officials, and a clear transmission log linked to a mercenary faction on the fringes of Carthan space. But even as those revelations shook the diplomatic channels, it was Juno's actions that consumed the feeds across the galactic net. Footage had leaked of the attack, of Ava standing over Draxil, bloodied and trembling, protecting her dog with nothing but a stolen plasma knife. But it wasn't the violence that captured attention. It was what came before it. The loyalty. The bond. The way Juno had thrown herself into the fray with no command, no hesitation, No thought of survival, only instinct. Across hundreds of systems, aliens watched the recordings in stunned silence. Some were horrified, others confused. Many couldn't understand what they were seeing. Why would a human risk their life for a lesser species? Why would the creature do the same? And the answer that spread wasn't spoken. It didn't come from a council address or a military debriefing. It came from Ava, in a single quiet interview recorded just after the medics confirmed Juno would recover. She sat at the edge of the exam table, her face pale and bruised, her eyes red but clear. The reporter, a Solarian from the station's diplomatic media office, had hesitated before asking, was it worth the risk? To fight an enforcer for a dog? Ava had looked straight into the camera and said, she's not just a dog. She's my family. You want to know what humanity really is? Watch what happens when someone threatens our pack. That clip went viral in under 3 minutes. Within hours, thousands of aliens began re-examining their old assumptions. Entire message boards lit up with new debates. Trade stations began issuing special clearance tags for human companions. And a wave of diplomatic delegations across the galaxy sent formal apologies to Earth. But none of that mattered to Ava. Not really. She only cared that Juno was going to be okay. She only smiled when the dog finally pushed herself to her paws, wobbly but proud. And when Juno leaned her head into Ava's chest, the weight of the last few days cracked and collapsed like a broken dam. Ava held her, forehead pressed to fur, whispering, "You came back to me." Behind them, the station director stood silent, surrounded by high-ranking officials from a dozen species. They had come to meet Ava, to thank her, to offer medals and status and credits. But when they saw the two of them, human and dog, bruised but unbroken, none of them spoke, because in that moment they understood it wasn't the dog that made humans dangerous. It was what humans became when that dog was in danger. The council chamber on Terry's 4 had never been so full. Delegates from 23 species gathered in solemn silence, their various eyes, sensors, and optical nodes fixed on the center dais. This was no ordinary session. No ceremonial vote. No trade discussion. This was a reckoning. At the heart of the chamber stood Ava Tran. Her hair was still matted with dried blood. One arm was wrapped tightly in a medical sling. But she stood tall, shoulders squared, chin lifted. Juno sat at her side, her bandaged leg tucked beneath her, but her posture was just as proud. The once dismissed tail beast now held the attention of an entire quadrant of the galaxy. The Xarn twins, whose harmonics had once mocked her, now emitted a low-frequency tone of respect. The Drelthi overseer, who had threatened to sanction Ava for acting out of protocol, remained uncharacteristically quiet. Even the Valkyrie ambassador, known for their aggressive disdain of emotion, dipped his head low in a gesture of humility. The evidence had been overwhelming. Draxal's surveillance room revealed months of espionage, smuggling, and sabotage. Entire peace delegations had been manipulated, trade blockades orchestrated, and worst of all, diplomatic murders covered up as accidents. All orchestrated by a handful of corrupt mercenary lords and exposed by a human woman and her dog. Presiding chair, a towering translucent Altari, finally spoke. Its voice, like wind through hollow bones, filled the chamber. Human Ava Tran, you acted without formal permission. You entered restricted zones. You assaulted a registered diplomatic envoy Ava's hands clenched at her sides. But, the Altari continued, you did so to save this station, its people, and the fragile peace we have all worked to maintain. And you did not act alone. It turned its eye stalk toward Juno. You acted with her. Gasps fluttered through the room. She is not a tool, not a security unit, not a weapon. She is something else. A guardian, a companion, an equal. The Altari nodded slowly. It is time we all reconsider the nature of what we once mocked. A hush fell across the council. The Heskari delegate stepped forward. Her daughter, Mila, sat beside her, eyes wide, antennae perked. The girl had refused to stay behind. She had insisted on seeing Juno the Brave. The Heskari ambassador lifted her hands, voice trembling with the weight of truth. Let it be recorded, she said, that from this day forward, all bonded non-human companions of Earthborn citizens are to be given protected diplomatic status. Threatening one shall be treated as an attack on the human themselves. Another wave of silence rolled through the room, and then slowly, one by one, the delegates began to stand. Not in protest, not in agreement, not it was the first time such a vote had ever passed without a single dissent. Later that evening, in the observation deck above the Arboretum, Ava leaned against the glass, staring out into the stars. The garden below shimmered with bioluminescent moss and slow-turning flora from Earth, and beyond Juno lay beside her, head resting on Ava's boot. You changed everything, you know, Ava murmured, voice soft. Juno's tail gave one gentle thump. Ava looked down, smiling faintly. They don't laugh anymore. But she wasn't just talking about the council dot in that moment. Ava understood what they had truly accomplished. They hadn't just earned respect for pets. They had shown the galaxy something it had forgotten in its pursuit of logic and efficiency, the power of loyalty, the strength of love, the unstoppable force of protecting what you care about. And the stars, so distant and cold, somehow didn't feel so far away anymore. The stars above Terran's 4 blinked in eerie silence, scattered like distant fireflies beyond the curved window of the observation deck. Ava stood quietly beneath them, her arms folded, her breath slow. The chaos was over, at least for now. The galaxy had shifted, and she could feel it in her bones. Behind her, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Footsteps approached, heavy and measured. She didn't turn. I thought you'd be gone by now, she said. I wanted to see for myself, came the voice, deep, smooth, and familiar. Captain Thala of the Corps Peacekeepers stepped beside her. He was Dravani, tall and obsidian-skinned, his violet eyes glowing faintly in the low light. She really did it, he added, glancing down at Juno, who was curled at Ava's feet. Ava looked down too. Juno was resting, her eyes half-lidded, her tail twitching occasionally, in some dream only dogs understand. Her bandages had been removed earlier that day. The medics had cleared her for travel, but neither of them had decided where to go. She didn't do it alone, Ava replied quietly. Thala nodded. No, she had someone who believed in her, who stood in front of a plasma blade and didn't flinch. He paused. Then, that kind of thing leaves a mark on a species, on a galaxy. Ava met his gaze. That was never the goal, but it was the effect. They stood in silence for a moment longer, watching the slow orbit of a passing moon. Then Thala pulled a small holopad from his coat and extended it. You've been invited to Earth's High Forum, he said. They want to award you and Juno the Soul Cross of Unity. Ava shook her head. I didn't do it for medals. I know, Thala said, but they need the symbol. So do the others. She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes turned back to the stars. Down on the plaza level, something shimmered, an unveiling ceremony. A new monument stood where the council dais once rose. A bronze sculpture of a woman and her dog, standing back to back, watching the horizon. The inscription read, "She guarded her world. He threatened her dog. One mistake." The monument was more than art. It was a message, now encoded in every ambassadorial briefing and first contact protocol issued across council worlds. A message burned into history. Do not threaten a human's companion, because now the galaxy understood pets were not pets. They were family. And humans, despite their fragile bones and small lifespans, were not to be underestimated, because when pushed too far, they became something even the most hardened species had no defense against. Not rage. Not vengeance. Love turned into wrath, somewhere far across the stars. In a war room on a Xarnian dreadnought, a commander watched the footage of Juno leaping through fire, of Ava standing bloodied but defiant over a defeated warrior. He turned to his aide and whispered, "If they act like that for a dog, what happens when you harm a child?" His aide said nothing. The screen dimmed. And one more world quietly updated its standing orders.